Hello, and welcome to Setting Up Your Own Palette. My name is Eric, and today we're going to talk about setting up our painting palettes for our first painting. Now, the painting palette that I have given you on your supply list is the Masterson Sta-wet palette. I really like this palette. I have 5 of them. I use them for all my painting. The main reason that these are really, really good is for acrylic painting. Acrylic paint dries very quickly. If you're working on a painting, say you set up, maybe it takes you 10 minutes to set up, have all your paint out, brushes ready, your water, everything ready to go. Acrylic paint on just a dry palette, like a piece of palette paper, will maybe last an hour. Unless you are continually mixing and spritzing with a water bottle, which is a pain. I don't like it. The paint develops what's called a skin on top. It's just not good to work with. It can mess up a painting depending on how much you actually add onto the painting, and then you're having to reduce with like an X-Acto knife or something. It's no good. So, Masterson Sta-wet paint palette, I think is a really, really good choice. I suppose you could make it or kind of find something very similar. The main goal of this palette is to be airtight. You'll notice that there's sort of just a container here that we're going to put the palette on, piece of palette paper. And then there's this top here that covers it. This is the 16 by 20 inch model. I like a big palette. I like to be able to mix and have plenty of room so my paints aren't touching and going in areas that I don't want them to. I think the 16 by 20 is great. It's a little bit kind of expensive. I think it's about 20 bucks. But I guarantee once you get it, it's just a piece of plastic. It'll last you your whole lifetime if nothing crazy happens to it. So it's, I think, a good investment if you continue and want to do acrylic painting in the future. Okay, so setting up this palette. Take the top off. I also have the palette paper here. This is the same brand, Premier Palette Masterson acrylic paper. Once again, this works really well. You can get a big pack of it for fairly cheap. Notice that it is 12 by 16 inches. So you could get another palette paper as well, but this is designed to stay wet, obviously. Okay, so piece of palette paper, my container. When you buy a brand new container, it will come with a sponge. That sponge is really good. It works probably as the best as it could be. It's a little bit expensive though. So after a couple paintings, you'll notice that with moisture, that pad, that sponge, will start to mold. It's kind of gross. You do have to toss it after a couple paintings. Depending on how well you're keeping it and how quickly you're moving, you could hypothetically use it for the whole 8-week course, but it might get moldy and nasty. If it does, you can use paper towels to mimic the sponge, do the exact same thing. All I'm going to do is lay down a couple layers of paper towel here. And you don't want it to be super thick. You'll notice if you have that sponge, maybe 1/8 of an inch thick. So I'm just going to lay down about 3 layers of paper towel, and I'm kind of ripping them up so they overlay nicely. Okay, so there's about 3 layers of paper towel there. I'm then going to just fully saturate those papers. Usually I just put them over the sink, but for this demo it doesn't really make sense to run you over to the sink. So I just have a glass of water here. I'm just going to pour this glass of water all the way on. You really can't do too much water. I'm going to dump it all. Because what will happen is it will pool up in the corner. See if I can do this without making a giant spill. A big pool of water there, and then you just dump the excess into the sink. I'm not going to do that now. I don't have the sink right here. But yeah, so you'll fully saturate, just dump a bunch of water on it, and then just dump it out. And then you'll have a good saturation on that page. I have too much water in here right now, but very easily it would stick to the bottom. I would just dump it out in a sink, and I'd be good. Okay, at that point, I will take a piece of palette paper. I like to load the piece of paper, so what I'll do is I'll actually put it down, sort of rub it, and then I'll flip it over again so that it is wet on both sides. And that's the first big step of setting up your palette. So I now have piece of palette paper. Once again, there's a little bit too much water in here, but that's okay. On a paper towel base, you'll have a sponge if you buy it new. You can continue to buy sponges. Once again, they're just a little bit expensive, so I use paper towels. And then you're ready. You have your palette here, you have your piece of paper, and you're ready to put paint on your palette. Once again, the great thing that this does is it keeps your paint from drying out. That's the main reason I'm recommending it over just using a piece of plastic or a piece of palette paper without any sort of moistening element. You do not have to buy this, although I strongly recommend it, and I will be using demos and showing how to use this, and I'll be using this. I've used it for years, and strongly recommend it. The other option would be to use a painting palette, just a piece of palette paper or another element, and then using a spritzer, a water bottle spritzer, to keep it moist as you're painting. You have to continually mix your paint. Every 10-15 minutes, you have to do a quick mix on it. It's not the end of the world if you don't get it, but this is making your life a lot easier. Okay, when mixing paint, a couple things to think about. There's a lot of different types of acrylic paint. Most likely, whatever paint you purchased, it's all the same line, the same product line, so that's good. If you do happen to have multiple types of paint, like if you have a basics, which is a more liquid paint, and then you have something like a heavy body, like this Liquitex heavy body here, sometimes there will be issues with mixing these. The viscosity and the thickness of the paint makes them more difficult to mix. It's easier if it's all the same product line. Now, if you have sort of leftover paint or hand-me-down paint or something like that, it's not the end of the world. You can still mix it, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. So think about when you're mixing, consistency of paint, whatever that product that you have, and then we're going to be setting up our palette right here in the next video.